Statistics South Africa prepares to release its quarterly labour force survey today. The official unemployment rate was recorded at 33.9% in the second quarter. However, the rate is even higher. That's according to the expanded definition. It's recorded at just over 44% in the second quarter of the year. Now, the country still facing a number of local and international challenges that are expected to weigh down on employment figures. South Africa's Youth Economic Council's Sthandiwe Msomi joining us now to chat more about what we can expect from this data today. Sthandiwe, good morning to you and thank you very much for your time. Let's begin with your expectations of what we are likely to see at around mid-morning, 11-ish. That's the time that these numbers are likely to be released. What are your expectations?
Thank you so much, Tony, for having us on your show today. As the South African Youth Economic Council, we don't see much movement happening in employment, particularly in strategic sectors of the economy. And we say this because in the second quarter, even though there were a few gains in certain sectors of the economy, sectors like manufacturing and construction saw job losses. The manufacturing sector had job losses of around 73,000. The construction sector had job losses of around 54,000. And so if those sectors, which are the ones that are supposed to lead economic growth and create employment opportunities for skilled and mostly unskilled labor, it's very hard to see young people being absorbed into the labor market, having seen those sectors see a decline. And many other analysts are saying that the festive season and expectations are going to create an incentive for firms to employ more people. But given the fact that we live in a climate where the central bank is continuously increasing interest rates, investment into the real economy is going to decline. And so we don't see material improvements in the labor statistics that are going to come out this afternoon.
Yeah, and you've certainly painted that picture very well for us. Remind us again of where the unemployment rate sits for young people in South Africa.
At the moment, unemployment for young people in South Africa sits at over 60%, around 66%. And so when you look at that number, you really worry because young people make up a large part of the working age population in South Africa. And if young people aren't being absorbed into the labor market, then we need to look at whether the structure we have at the moment is working. At the moment, the government is looking at the private sector to create jobs. But if you look at the rate at which small businesses fall out of business in this country, it really becomes hard to imagine small businesses growing to the point at which they can employ young people. And unemployment in South Africa is very structural, and it's caused by a lot of changes on our economy. Firstly, obviously, the legacy of apartheid, but also the technological development of the economy has left so many young people behind, particularly in rural areas and townships. And if we continuously see fiscal consolidation on the part of government, cutting budgets into education, into funding for small businesses, then we don't create direct pathways for the poorest of the poor to have the possibility of having economic and social mobility and growing up in the economic class that they're in. And so we really worry about whether or not this number of young people who are unemployed in this country will actually change.
Yeah, you've mentioned at the start of your responses that the key sectors of the economy that usually are labor absorbing, they disappointed somewhat in the last quarter. But you've also mentioned now quite a key element, and that is the small business sector, which usually also absorbs people into jobs. Is that where young people are mostly taken in the small business space? And how do you describe that space right now in the midst of this ongoing load shedding?
The small business sector right now is very vulnerable to changes and shifts in the economy. At the moment, we see that a large part of the economy is let down by demand because people simply don't have cash in their hands. And with the central bank continuously increasing the interest rates, people are paying more for their cars, for their properties, linked to interest rates, and that results in borrowing costs being way too high. And so the probability of a small business wanting to expand, going to a commercial bank to get a loan to grow their business, that's quite small at this point in time. And so young people who are employed in small businesses are continuously vulnerable to the possibility of that business shutting down because of external factors that aren't conducive to businesses actually growing. But another thing that we always advocate for as the South African Youth Economic Council is to see the state actually play a big role in growing this economy. And so looking at state ownership of strategic assets and productive assets in the economy is key, because the state has the ability to create massive employment for so many of the skilled and unskilled labor that we have in this country. And so to also see state-owned entities themselves deteriorating is quite disappointing, because there's massive potential there for young people to be absorbed in the labor market in a climate where the survival rate of small and medium-sized enterprises is very, very low in this country.
Yeah. Sthandiwe, we're heading into the festive season, and that usually talks to the tourism numbers, or tourists fanning out throughout the country to spend whatever earnings they would have collected throughout the year. How do numbers stack up in that particular sector? Because there is another labor-absorbing sector of the economy that also does take in those low-skilled employees.
The tourism sector, I think, is very strategic to employing young people who have minimal skills. And in South Africa, the tourism sector is characterized by a customer base hugely consisting of foreign visitors who come into our country and visit the beautiful scenery and historic sites that we have. But unfortunately, it's not enough to think that a young person being employed by a tourism business is going to see economic liberation anytime soon, because we know that the pay rates there are very, very low. And apart from that, as our council, we always advocate for young people to not only be employed by these businesses, but to be the ones who are actually owners of these businesses, as long as we continue to live in a capitalist society. And so if you look at the tourism sector, it continues to be dominated by a very small class of people in this country who are the owners of the assets and productive assets in that sector. And if you look at the investment that government is making in those businesses, particularly those businesses that are owned by young people, it's not enough to ensure that there's actual representation and transformation in a sector like tourism. And also, it's quite unfortunate that our own people in our own country, often at times during the holiday season, don't have enough money to spend on tourism and traveling across the country. It continues to be foreign visitors who do that. And so with a small pool of financing like that from a customer point of view, it becomes very difficult to look at how exactly young people not only be absorbed into that sector, but also become business owners in those sectors as well, so we can actually see real transformation in the tourism sector.
Yeah, as we taper down in this conversation, Sthandiwe, I'm going to ask you as a last question on the impact of load shedding in the creation of jobs, or indeed the losses of jobs for some people. But I want to start off, or take advantage of the fact that you are in KZN as we speak. Yesterday, I was talking to your province's MEC of Economic Development, and he spoke about the creation of a sovereign wealth fund for the province of KwaZulu-Natal. In his view, this is possibly the panacea to the problem, economic difficulties that province faces right now, and at least for him, this is something that could help create jobs and alleviate the suffering that people are going through there. Your thoughts on the creation of a sovereign wealth fund?
As a council, we've all unanimously been of the view that a sovereign wealth fund or other forms of financing like a state bank are needed in South Africa, because it's quite unfortunate that companies that were started during the tenure of apartheid, your big mining houses, your big energy companies, are still operating today without many reparations being made in acknowledgement and cognizance of the economic and social impact of the policies that were crafted by the apartheid government. And in this country, we always hear the government talk about the fact that they don't have money, they don't have funds to finance businesses, to invest in our communities, and to empower our people. And so if the constant reason for lack of investment into our communities is the fact that the government doesn't have money, we cannot be silent and really not do anything about it when companies listed on the JSE continue to make millions every single day in this country and export that capital to other global financial markets and not investing in the real economy. And so although many economic analysts will tell you that the creation of a sovereign wealth fund or a state bank will result in investment fleeing the country, I think it's an option worth exploring to look at how exactly we can transfer wealth from a concentrated group to the masses of our people. And that's something I think we should look at today more than ever, because with the recent repeal of BE being a mandatory policy for state-owned entities, we need to look at mechanisms to ensure that capital and wealth in this country actually moves to close the wealth and income inequality gap. And so obviously there'd have to be building of state capacity, I think, to even handle the creation and maintenance of a sovereign wealth fund or a state bank. And once that organizational and government capacity is actually built, we must be very bold and forthcoming about rewriting the wrongs of the past and ensuring that wealth moves from one group to another to create a more just society. Yeah. And I think that the creation of a sovereign wealth fund is part and parcel of that conversation.
Finally, and very quickly, if you can, the impact of load shedding on jobs. What's the diagnosis there?
The impact of load shedding, I think, is colossal, because businesses go for hours without being able to operate. And it's inherently unsustainable. And of course, we've just had the COP27 summit, and our council itself actually hosted a COP27 dialogue with many stakeholders to engage on what the solutions are for the energy crisis that we see ourselves in today. We have to look at the maintenance and really looking at rebuilding our power stations. And I particularly say that because many countries overseas right now are gearing up their consumption and use of coal, countries such as Germany and many other countries in the European Union. And if that's happening, we need to look at how we can continue to use our coal while we still have it in abundance in our country. And so we must have investment into our power plants to ensure that we're able to generate energy on a regular basis. But also, I guess it's inevitable, Rob, that climate change is a real thing, and we have to look at how we move into a just energy transition as a country, while still being able to maintain jobs and while still being able to keep the lights on. And so while we still are dependent on coal, we think that it's quite imperative that as the world moves forward in renewable energy, there has to be policies on how renewable energy can be made sustainable in our country, but also to look at how young people can become business owners in those sectors or in that emergent sector, to see representation and diversity in that sector. Not only just for job creation, but to also have sustainable energy supply within our economy, because the energy crisis has impacted businesses, and particularly, once again, small and medium enterprises that can't necessarily afford generators, and many of those will be based in your townships and your rural areas. And so the government must be very bold in ensuring that we are still able to use our coal while we still have it, and not be bullied by COP27 and international forces that wants to move African countries out of coal while they continue to burn coal itself. But we also have to ensure that we move into an energy transition that is sustainable, both for jobs and to keep the lights on for businesses.
Sthandiwe Msomi, thank you very much for your time. She is with the South African Youth Economic Council and very, very well versed in these issues.